first up, we do have Chef RD Emily Schlag. Emily is the Culinary Medicine operation or culinary operations manager for Soups Up in New York. She does amazing work continuing to bring culinary medicine to the forefront and make it accessible for everyone. So I'm so excited to introduce Chef Emily for this live cooking demo today. As well as joining her is Chef RD Heather Nace. Heather has taken over the program at the Goldring Center for Culinary Medicine at Tulane University as Director of Operations and Executive Chef. She's took over shortly before the pandemic. Rough time to enter into that position, and has done a phenomenal job of not only transitioning and working through the challenges of virtual learning and keeping those kitchen doors open and accessible for both students, medical professionals, and community, but expanding those offerings throughout. So she is going to join Chef Emily as moderator. Along with her we have the amazing Chef Jay Judy here from UCF Rosen. He has been a rock star helping us with the hands-on classes on Thursday. Also on Sunday, you saw him and met him yesterday, and his expertise and perspective through culinary medicine from that food and chef lens. So I'm so excited to introduce these panelists today and give them a great big round of applause.
All right, I guess we're getting started. Yes, I just need the clicker. Can you hand me the clicker? Thank you. We're just going to sort out some tech stuff real quick. Heather, are you good? Technology is always fun. Okay, we're live. All right, hi everyone. My name is Emily Schlag. You saw me on stage yesterday. Now I'm just looking different wearing a chef coat. So today, like Carrie mentioned, we're going to be talking about nutrient and calorie density and really showing how we can modify recipes in order to fit individual needs. So we have some objectives today. First thing, we just want you to be able to explain the difference between a calorie dense and a nutrient dense food and identify situations in which it would be appropriate to recommend calorie dense foods, and also know how to modify a recipe in order to make it maybe more nutrient dense while maintaining flavor and visual appeal, which is so important when we're eating. And we also want you to be able to modify a recipe to perhaps make it more calorie dense while maintaining key nutrients such as healthy fats, protein, and fiber. So we're going to be doing a lot of different recipes today. Carrie told me I was too ambitious, so hopefully it all, goes okay. We're going to be showing a lot of different recipes 2 ways, and I'm essentially going to show you kind of opposite ends of the spectrum as far as nutrient density versus calorie density goes. So hopefully you see some of those changes that we're making and kind of what needs to be added or taken away to fit your individual needs or your patient's individual needs. So we're going to be doing a butternut squash stew 2 ways, a chicken salad 2 ways, a smoothie 2 ways, and then we will have a little chocolate mousse at the end to cap it off. So the first thing we want to do is define calorie or energy dense foods, and I will be using these pretty interchangeably throughout the presentation. And the thing that I found while I was trying to put this together is there's really no standard definition for what a calorie dense food is or what an energy dense food is. But in general, this is just going to be a food with a high proportion of calories by weight. That's it, high proportion of calories by weight. And I did want to cite the 2015 DGA executive summary, which noted that foods are considered nutrient dense when prepared with little or no added solid fats, sugars, refined starches, and sodium. And I included that up here because oftentimes, as a result of this definition, foods that do contain these things, added fats, refined starches, sugars, sodium, those often get lumped into that calorie or energy dense category. And we'll kind of explore that a little further as we go along. So some of the characteristics that we see of an energy dense food, number one, they're usually going to either be naturally higher in fat or contain added fats. Why is this a characteristic of an energy dense food? It is because when we look at fats, they generally contain about 9 calories per gram, whereas our carbohydrates and our protein contain 4 calories per gram. So when we're adding fat, we're adding calories. These foods are also going to have a lower water content generally because water has no caloric value. If we're adding water, we're reducing the calories by weight or by volume. And then often highly processed foods are kind of automatically lumped into this category of being energy or calorie dense. And they're often referred to as empty calories. So there is a large body of research kind of surrounding energy density and weight management. A lot of it has really just come from one place, and that is the Laboratory for the Study of Human Ingestive Behavior at Penn State, led by Barbara Rolls. If you're familiar with the volumetrics diet, she is the creator of the volumetrics diet. That really explores a lot of the relationship between calorie and energy dense foods and weight management. We're not going to get too much into weight management today, but I did want to bring this up because, as I said, I had a hard time finding a standard definition of what is an energy dense food. And the volumetrics diet has quantified energy density into 4 categories. And I thought it would just be helpful to kind of show those different categories and the examples that they use in those different categories. So we have very low energy density, medium energy density, and high energy density. When we're looking at the very low energy density foods, all of these examples given are from volumetrics, not examples that I have put up here. We can see that they're listing, fruits and vegetables, broth-based soups, and non-fat dairy, so things with a really high water content are going to be very low in energy density. And as we kind of move up in that energy density, we're starting to see, cooked grains, low-fat meats, beans and legumes, these things that are full of nutrition. And as we move on, we start to see more what we call mixed foods or prepared foods, foods that have other items added to them, until we get all the way up to the high energy density category. And I did want to highlight this. I did want to highlight it. Sorry, it's all the way at the bottom. Hopefully you can see it. Some of those examples that we see in that category. We have crackers, chips, more processed foods, cookies, another processed food. We got nuts up there. We love nuts. So those nuts are part of this high energy density category. So then we start thinking, is this a bad thing? Are high energy density foods always, a bad thing that we always need to only lump, heavily processed foods into? Yes, we have crackers, chips, and cookies up here, but we also have some highly nutritious foods in this category as well. So I also wanted to define nutrient-dense foods. Another thing that's, a little tricky to define, but generally this is going to be foods with a high proportion of nutrients by weight, those nutrients being our essential vitamins and minerals, fiber, and protein. If you know me, I love to talk about fiber. And going back to that 2015 DGA executive summary, we see that they have defined nutrient-dense foods. It's a really long definition, but it's all vegetables, fruits, whole grains, seafood, eggs, beans and peas, unsalted nuts and seeds, and low-fat dairy products and lean meats. Kind of sounds like the Mediterranean diet, or the Cindy diet as we redefined it yesterday. Specifically, they define it as when these foods are prepared with little or no added solid fats, sugars, refined starches, and sodium. I find this definition kind of interesting because these foods that it's saying when it's not prepared with, they're not always, foods that are adding a lot of calories to this item. The sodium is not really adding calories to this food. So by adding it, we're kind of saying, okay, we're making it less nutrient dense, but not necessarily to the other end of the spectrum and calling it an energy dense food. But that's sometimes the connotation that we get when we add these foods. Okay, now it's no longer nutrient dense. Now we're calling it energy dense. And that might not always be the case. Going back to our characteristics of those nutrient dense foods, if an energy dense food is high in fats or added fats, our nutrient dense foods are often considered to be low in fats or added fats, and generally are going to have a high water content. And if we think about, our fruits and vegetables, those are items that have a higher water content. They're also going to have a high fiber content. And we see that minimally processed foods are often automatically lumped into this category. And I wanted to include this because, there's plenty of people out there that are making infographics that have no medical or nutrition background, but they love to make stuff like this, and people love to share it online. So this is kind of what we're going up against. And this is what our patients, our clients are seeing when they go on, Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, this kind of black and white where energy dense food equals bad. Nutrient dense food gets the, the thumbs up, the check mark. This is good stuff. So those nutrient dense foods we're showing, fruits, vegetables. We got a little salmon over on the left, but the idea being like, these are the good foods. This is what you should be eating. Energy dense food is bad. And it's all that junk food, all of that highly processed food. We have, candies and French fries and soda and pizza, and this is bad stuff. And it's just this kind of black and white, one or the other. This is what people are being shown online. So I thought, it'd be fun to kind of take some of these items that were on the previous slide and see what is their energy density. And I will say I made this slide, so obviously there's some kind of bias in the foods that I picked. But if we go to the next slide, so we see I included things like soda, fries, pizza, potato chips, and then I also included some of those nutrient dense foods, yogurt. We had yogurt at breakfast this morning, avocados, salmon, nuts, granola. And we can see that on this list, they're kind of dispersed throughout. A lot of them are on the lower end of that energy density, but we see that the food that has the highest energy density of this list that I made are the dry roasted almonds without salt added, something that the DGA would consider a nutrient dense food. So we see that that nutrient dense food can also be an energy dense food. And at the top of the list, at the lowest energy density, is a can of Coke, because it has, so we're looking at 45 calories per 100 grams. So we saw on the previous slide, the soda was in the energy dense category. Well, on this list, it's the least energy dense food up here. Now, is it nutrient dense? Not necessarily. So again, I'm just trying to get you all to think about how often we have this black and white thinking, and we need to kind of move beyond that. Another thing I do just want to point out, and we can talk about it later, is this does not take into consideration our serving sizes. So we're probably not eating 600 calories of almonds in one sitting, and we're probably not having 45 calories of a Coke in one sitting. But when we're just looking at energy density, this is kind of where we fall. So can a food be energy dense and nutrient dense? I think yes, but it really depends on how we define them. If we automatically categorize ultra processed foods or processed foods as energy dense and unprocessed foods as nutrient dense, if that's how you're defining them, you might see that there's no overlap, but I think that there can be this overlap. Again, we're removing that black and white thinking. We can see that the almonds are nutrient dense and energy dense at the same time. And so I just briefly want to talk about energy density and weight management, but more importantly, improving diet quality. That's what we're really here for today. And so we all know, I think we've known this for a long time, that if someone is consuming a diet and they're going to be in a caloric deficit, they're going to see some weight loss. Doesn't matter what the diet type is, doesn't matter what the new fad diet of the day is, they're in a caloric deficit, they're going to see some weight loss. But interestingly, we also found that if we have an increase of dietary fiber, that is the strongest predictor of weight change. And a decrease in energy density is also positively associated with weight change. And there have been a number of short-term studies, not so much in the long-term study category, but a lot of short-term studies have been conducted that assess energy intake in subjects that are provided foods with varying levels of energy density. And again, a lot of this is really just coming from a single research laboratory, again, led by Barbara Rolls. So we're really only getting a lot of this information from one place, unfortunately, but they did find a positive association between energy density and ad libitum energy intake. Basically meaning that, you know, if you're providing someone with an abundance of low energy density foods, they're not necessarily making up for those calories by eating more. If we're eating an abundance of that low energy density food, there's a decrease in the calories consumed, regardless of the macronutrient breakdown of those foods. So whether it's low or high in fat, low or high in carbohydrates, we're generally observing this. Next slide. Oh, no, you're good. Oh, wait, go back. When you use the same picture in all your slides, sometimes you don't notice that they change. So as I mentioned, there have been few long-term trials that have specifically examined this, unfortunately, but the little bit of data that we do have does observe modest weight loss in studies that recommend a low energy density diet. However, like I said, the thing that I care about more is improving diet quality. So I think that there are a lot of reasons to encourage these low energy density foods that have nothing to do with the fact that they, you know, are lower in calories, but it's really about the fact that, going back to that DGA definition, these foods include vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, seeds, seafood, lean meats, these foods that are high in nutrition. So even if we kind of forget about the fact that, yes, they're lower in energy density, they're going to be high in nutrition. And that's what I want for my patients, for my clients. So we're really going to switch gears now. We're about to get into the food. I know that's why you're all here. We do want to focus a lot today on talking about convenience foods. And when you say convenience foods, a lot of people think, yeah, highly processed foods, junk food, food that, you know, we don't want people to be eating. But I want to kind of rethink the idea of a convenience food and what great stuff it can do for us. So we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, the humble rotisserie chicken, $5 at Costco, $5 to $6, you know, at your local grocery store, something really cheap, really easy to obtain. Now, if we think about just a regular chicken and having to roast that, you buy a raw chicken, you take it home, you're going to roast the whole thing from start to finish. At minimum, it's going to take you an hour and a half to prepare, and that does not factor in time for dishes. So there's a lot of time and energy that goes into preparing something from the raw state. And then you have to think about, what am I using this chicken for? Do I need to make sides that go with it? Do I need to shred it or cut it up to put it into, you know, my tacos, my soup, my salad, whatever I want to use it for? How much time am I investing in this chicken? And money is always really important too. So if we're looking at the average price of a broiler fryer chicken, which is just your standard chicken you're going to buy at the grocery store, we're looking at about $1.46 per pound. Honestly, this number has probably gone up since a few weeks when I found this number. But our average size of that too is important to know, is about 2.5 to 4.5 pounds. Now, if we're looking at the average price of a rotisserie chicken, we're looking at about $5.50. And that's for about a 2-pound bird, making the average price per pound about $2.75. So yes, this rotisserie chicken per pound is going to be more expensive than just buying that raw chicken. But again, that raw chicken is going to take us at least an hour and a half to prepare, not factoring in dishes. So we have to think about, how valuable is my time? How much is this costing me in time to prepare this food from raw? For a lot of people, it makes more sense to opt for that more convenient food, that pre-cooked food, because it's saving us a lot of time, and all of our time is valuable. So for some of our recipes today, we're just going to use a rotisserie chicken. I am going to show you all how to break it down. I apologize that there's no camera kind of zooming in. You could always check the Zoom recording afterwards if you want kind of a zoomed in look on how to break down a cooked chicken. I think it's a really good skill. Oh my God, yay. I was like, oh, what did I do? I think it's a really good skill to have. If any of you were at the conference last year, you saw me break down a raw chicken. Honestly, I think a cooked chicken is a little more intimidating. So if I screw it up today, it's fine. We all screw up some things sometimes. But I have my little rotisserie chicken right here. Show it to the camera. It's humble, you know, our wing's a little bit burnt, but it's fine. It cost me $5, easy. So when we're looking at our chicken, we want to have the breasts on top. We have our 2 legs and our wings. I am going to take the legs off first. I think that's the easiest thing to remove. So when we have our chicken, we have this kind of skin connecting the leg to the breast. So what we want to do is kind of just cut through that skin and expose. And honestly, the skin is so soft on this, I don't even need a knife really, just so we can kind of pull apart those legs and expose it. And then we have our hip joint, and we can actually just fully pop that hip joint open. And this honestly just falls right off. And I'm just going to cut through the rest of that skin to separate my leg from the rest of the bird. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, just kind of pull that open. If I need to use my knife a little bit more just to cut through that skin, I will. But it's really open, easy to just kind of pop that leg open through that hip joint. And now we have our 2 legs separated. So if you do want to cook your own chicken at home, you're going to do the same thing and you have a nice presentation there. The next thing I'm going to do is, I like to say this is my least favorite part, and then I get to the breasts and I'm like, no, actually this is my least favorite part. But I'm going to do the wings next. The tip here is you're really just going to kind of cut up through the armpit is what I like to say, but you're going to separate, kind of start to pull that wing away from the body. And then with our knife, we're just going to kind of cut up into that armpit until we see that joint. Just going to look in there, kind of pull it open. Once that joint is separated, I can cut right through that joint to take off the wing. And I'm just going to repeat that really quickly on the other side, just up and through the armpit to separate the wing. Last, we have the breasts. This is actually my least favorite part. Sometimes it can be kind of tricky on a cooked bird to get the entire breast off in one piece. Thankfully, I'm just shredding this afterwards, so it doesn't really matter if I screw it up. But we have the sternum on top, and so what we want to do is, first of all, I'm going to just kind of separate the skin from the rest of the backbone. I'm actually going to take some of that backbone off just so I'm a little more secure. So I'm going to put my knife, I like to start on the left side, right to the left of that sternum. And I'm just kind of using little motions, nothing big with my knife, just to kind of open that up. And then I'm going to do down into the side and kind of follow that curve of the rib cage to separate the breast from the rib cage. And this is kind of easier on a warm bird, but like I said, we're going to do our best. And you just want to use really little kind of sawing motions with your knife. And this guy does not want to cooperate with me. Oh yeah, we're real shreddy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you took the skin off, would it make your life easier at this point or no?
It wouldn't really matter.
Okay.
oh yeah, this is totally falling apart and shredding apart. So, sometimes it doesn't fully work, but you see I'm kind of exposing this and just getting the rest of that off. The skin's on, so you can't really tell that it doesn't look as great.
Chef Jay, you got any
I was
thoughts
just
on
going to
this?
say, with a
Is it
cold
also
bird
your
like
least favorite
that,
part of the
it's-
chicken?
no, I'm a wing guy, so I like wings the best, but I do like a bit of breast with the idea that the breast meat here, because we're going to shred it, it really doesn't matter. You can't hurt it. It's already dead. So she's just gonna, do the best she can. And after that, she'll set the knife down, and then you're just gonna pull the residual stuff off. Since she's taking the skin off anyway, this is gonna be most of the work done by hand.
Yeah, that's really just if you want to have a nice presentation, you're kind of carving it up, serving it to your, friends or family. Like I said, I'm just shredding this for some chicken salad later. So if it was me at home, I would just go all hands in and just totally shred it apart. Now, I do want to mention, I don't like wasting food whenever I can help it. There is often going to be a lot of meat kind of left on the rest of that bird. So you do want to shred off as much as you can. Just kind of get in there with your fingers and take off as much meat as possible. This is a great chance for the chef to have a little snack while they're preparing their meal. It's kind of my favorite part of doing this is my little snack. And then whatever is left, save those bones, put them in a freezer bag or, some kind of container in the freezer and save them for stock. Sometimes I even get lazy when I make stock and I literally just put chicken bones in some water in a pot, put that on the stove. If I'm feeling really lazy and don't want to put onions or celery or anything in there, you can still get a really delicious stock out of that. So we're not letting any of that bird go to waste. And I'm just going to take a minute to shred up all of this meat. Heather, I think we had a couple kind of like general questions about
Yeah, well, I
rotisserie
just wanted to
chicken.
bring up, and I will check to make sure there's no questions coming in right now, but I wanted to bring up something that maybe people in the audience are thinking, which is that, what about with rotisserie chicken? Should we be worried about the sodium content? I did a little research, I did a little digging just to see. And according to Consumer Reports, they looked at a bunch of different stores and comparing just a basic rotisserie chicken, none of the fancy flavors that they have, but just a basic rotisserie chicken. It seems as though, and I hate to, make any particular store feel bad, but Sam's Club and Costco came in at the worst levels of sodium, around somewhere between 400 and 500 milligrams per a 3-ounce serving size. So, we might be a little worried about that. However, I will say most of the other regular grocery store chains came in much lower. They were all around 100 milligrams for that same serving size. And Kroger in particular, if you have a Kroger near you, you're lucky. Theirs came in at the lowest at about 40 milligrams per that serving size. So, you do need to be mindful of this potentially, as particularly if sodium is something that you are concerned about. I will say, some of that sodium might be coming from like an injection situation, which at that point it's inside the meat. So there's only so much you can do, but some of it is going to be sprinkled on the outside. And so if we do remove the skin, we could save some sodium there. I think the other thing we wanted to mention while Emily's working on getting the rest of this chicken shredded up is just rethinking convenience foods in general. So, as Emily mentioned earlier, we, as dietitians, we support the use of convenience foods. At dinner last night, I was actually just talking about how my go-to lately has been bagged salads. There's really nothing wrong with these foods, and we want to make sure, and I think it kind of speaks back to what we were talking about yesterday with food security, right? Like, we don't want to demonize things that make our patients' lives easier. And oftentimes these things that we have listed up here are great examples. They're also, nutritious examples. Now, things like pre-cut produce, we all know that that's probably going to cost more. But as Emily mentioned with the chicken, that may be worth it to some people because time is money. And if that saves you time cooking dinner, then great. Same thing with things like frozen fruits and vegetables. We all know that these things are nutritionally equivalent. There's no reason why we have to be only promoting fresh fruits and vegetables. In addition, I mean, I think it's just important to note that we want to think about looking at the labels. So yes, there's a difference between processed foods and ultra processed foods. And hopefully we can help our patients with the education of what to look for on the label, not so much paying attention to the front of the package, but flipping it over, how to read the nutrition facts panel, as well as how to look at that ingredients list to determine what we're really working with. So yes, we like convenience foods.
I do want to touch on the sodium in the chicken as well. Something I always like to kind of encourage too, if you know an item is higher in sodium, but you know, it's easier for you to obtain, the low sodium version isn't available, that doesn't mean we can't use it or we can't, you know, or that we have to tell our patients not to use it. I just like to have people keep in mind that, you know, if I know this chicken is on the saltier side, if I'm using it in something else, then I know that I'm going to add less salt than I might normally add to make up for the fact that that chicken, you know, is a little bit on the saltier side. So in the soup I'm making, I'm going to add less salt if I need to kind of compensate for the fact that that chicken is higher sodium. So we all kind of balance out in the end.
All right, speaking of your soup, are you ready to get started?
Yeah, so we're going to do some stew 2 ways. And so we have both of the ingredients lists listed up here right now. I'm going to just chop a couple things really quickly, and then that's it. These are both actually quite easy to make. So our kind of seasoning vegetables that we have are pretty standard: onion, celery, and garlic. But the thing I love about soup is you can just use whatever you have in the fridge or whatever you like, whatever is available to you. If you have taken any classes with us, literally ever, we have probably shown you how to dice an onion, but it's always nice to have a refresher. So when we have our onion, I like to think of it as a globe. We have a north pole, a south pole, the south pole being our root. We're going to cut through that. We are not going to cut through the equator of our onion, and I just like to cut off the north pole first. So we're going to cut through that. Once your onion is cut in half, it's much easier to peel. I see people all the time trying to peel whole onions, and I'm like, why are you making your life harder? We don't need to do that. So I'm just going to peel that. And also, my favorite thing to do with soup is blend it when I'm done. So that means I can be really lazy when I'm chopping it. So now all I'm going to do is make a couple quick slices, not cutting through the root. And then go against those slices that I made to make a nice dice. Always, always, always important to have your fingers in a claw. Your knife should be rubbing up against your knuckles. Please don't be like my prep cook that had his fingers out and cut off the little tip of his finger and has been out on medical leave for like 3 months. Don't do that. It's very unfortunate. So always in a claw. The chef at the first fine dining restaurant I ever worked at told me, I want to see your knuckles silver from rubbing up against your knife so much. That's not actually ever going to happen, but it's always kind of stuck with me. With that onion end, we can add that to our bag with our chicken bones and use that in our stock if we want to. Not necessarily going to use the onion skins in our stock because they can have kind of a bitter flavor to them, but those onion ends are totally okay. I'm just going to get those last few pieces, and that's our onion. Always nice to have some little prep bowls or something near you while you're chopping. And we all got these lovely CCMS bench scrapers in our bags this week. So now you know how to use them. You just scrape everything up with that. Thanks, Cecilia, if you're here for the bench scraper. Next thing we're going to do, yeah, woo, Cecilia, we love her. Next thing we have is our celery. One thing I want to point out with celery is that it often has a little bit of dirt kind of on the inside of the rib. So this is something you should always wash all of your produce, but especially kind of the inside of celery. Check for anything dirty or gritty on the inside of that. It's often missed. And then our celery sometimes comes with some leaves on top. This is great in our stock, but if you are a lazy cook like me, I'm just going to leave those leaves on and put them in my soup. So I'm just going to dice this celery about the same size as my onions. I like to start by cutting my celery into smaller pieces just to make it a little more manageable. Now, some of my pieces are really thin, kind of small already, so I'm going to leave that as is. But my wider pieces, I'm just going to cut into thin sticks. And I'm just going to do that for all of them. And then once we have our thin sticks, I'm just going to line those all up and slice them to be about the same size as my onions. That's really key when cooking. If you're making a soup or anything where you're cooking things at the same time, you want them to be the same size so that they cook evenly. I'm just going to finish that up really quick.
Would it be okay in this case, chef, to use a pre-cut vegetable from the store?
Oh yeah, and we're going to be doing that later.
Absolutely.
But yeah, oftentimes at grocery stores, I think a lot of us, especially chefs, we kind of make fun of it sometimes. And I feel bad for that, what I've not really liked so much at the grocery store in the past, but I've noticed a lot of grocery stores nowadays will have kind of like a mirepoix pre-chopped blend in the refrigerated aisle that has onions, carrots, and celery all pre-chopped together. And that can be a really great base for a soup. If we have people that have trouble chopping or really just don't have the time or the energy or the mental capacity to bring out their cutting board and knife, we can buy those things pre-chopped if we need to.
You can also get a food processor with a chopping attachment. Zzz, 30 seconds and done.
Yes. Also great for lazy cooks like me, except I hate cleaning the food processor. That's the only downside to it. All right, and really the last thing I have to chop is my garlic. So again, if you've been at literally any class with us, we have shown you how to chop garlic, but I'm going to do Carrie's least favorite thing and use a garlic press. I know Dr. Harlan likes them, so he would approve. But the first thing we need to do is take the skin off. So when we're smashing our garlic, we don't want to do like one of those because that's not safe. So we're just going to put our body weight on our knife and firmly kind of crush that garlic to separate the skin from the rest of that clove of garlic. These are really fat pieces of garlic, so it's not working super well for me right now. But once that's crushed, it's a little bit easier to peel that. And then I can use my garlic press to mince that garlic. I hate mincing garlic. For some reason, mentally, I kind of refuse to buy pre-minced garlic. I feel like I should, considering how much I hate it, but the garlic press has been a huge time saver for me.
You notice a little bit of less flavor, I think, in the pre-mixed or pre-minced rather.
Yeah.
Although it's a time saver. It doesn't taste quite as good. It doesn't have the vibrance. It doesn't have quite the pop, but in a pinch, if it's in your fridge and it lasts a week or two, you know, you can use it.
And I'm wondering too, Heather, I know you've talked before about freezing ginger.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think they make a frozen garlic now too. Like they have the frozen herbs and the frozen garlic. That could be another time saver. I love freezing ginger. I've never frozen my own garlic, but yeah. And then what I do with the ginger is I grate it. So I think that would work on the garlic as well.
These are fat cloves of garlic. They don't even fit in my press. Also, shout out to the discount stores in New York City. I got this garlic press for $1. It's not the best garlic press, but it's gotten me through some times together. So I love it for that. All right, that's all the chopping we have to do for this soup. So I am going to start cooking. I have my onions and my garlic and my celery already chopped for the other soup. So we are going to start cooking. We're going to have some open flame on the stage today. Always fun.
We won't tell the fire
People
marshal.
in the front row, you're in charge of letting me know if my flame ever goes out. So, oh, we do have oil. Okay, thank you. So I like to preheat my pot before I add any oil, just to kind of get things hot. And then as my pots are preheating, we can go ahead and add our oil. Do not walk away at this point. I've seen a lot of people, they have their pot on the highest heat, put their oil in, and they're like, now is a great time for me to chop my onion, something that's gonna take me a couple minutes. Turn around and that oil's smoking. Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want to start a fire today. I don't think they would invite us back if I did that. So that's why I always chop all of my produce first. And oh, we can see it in here. So the thing that we want to look for in our oil is that it can move really quickly in our pan. It kind of ripples and shimmers in that pot. If your oil is just kind of pooling up in the middle of your pot, that tells me it's not quite hot enough yet. But another thing we can do is always kind of throw a pinch in the pot and see if it sizzles. And as you can see, we are not sizzling right now, so our oil is not quite hot enough yet. So I'm just going to let that heat up for another minute or so as I kind of get things situated.
Have you, some people like to do like they drop water in the pot.
I don't like to do that.
Not the best, right?
No, because obviously as soon as the oil heats, the water is going to start popping, and you might be standing close enough that jumps out on you.
Yeah.
You would not like the feeling of that on your skin.
All right, so we are starting to sizzle. I don't know if anyone in the front row can kind of hear it, maybe on the mic, but we are and popping. So I'm just gonna throw in my onions. Sometimes with recipes, it calls to saute our onions first. I'm doing the onions and the celery at the same time, just to kind of get it all out of the way. So on this pot, on y'all's right, we are gonna be making our lentil and butternut squash stew. And on y'all's left, we're gonna have that chicken stew. And you can see that at this point, we've done exactly the same thing so far. And Heather, I think you had something to talk about while we wait for these veggies to saute.
Yeah, I also just want to mention that someone in our chat said that they actually crush garlic with some salt and olive oil and then store that in the refrigerator, and it lasts for a while. And then when they do their cooking, they just are mindful that they've already added salt in that process. So like you said, with the rotisserie chicken, they go a little bit lighter on the salt. We did not mention pre-cut fruit earlier, but we also have a comment about that can definitely be a big time saver. What else do we need to mention now? Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you, because I know you are sauteing your vegetables now. Notice that you are not adding your garlic at the same time as you add your onions and your celery. Can you maybe explain why that is?
Yeah, so garlic is really sensitive and has a tendency to burn pretty quickly. And once that garlic burns, it is bitter. It does not taste very good. So I like to add my garlic with the rest of my seasonings. So any spices I'm using, we're using some tomato paste today. Those things that don't need to cook for very long. In a recipe, it'll sometimes say, add this spice or seasoning, stir for 30 seconds until fragrant. That is the time to add our garlic as well, because it only needs 30 to 60 seconds before it's fragrant. Then we can add our liquid, and that's going to prevent our garlic from burning.
I do want to mention with garlic too, it's relative to the size that it's cut. So if you mince it really, really small, yeah, it's going to burn super fast. A rough chop burns a little slower, but then you have to contend with a large piece of garlic. But since she's pureeing, really not a problem in this case.
Yeah, nothing worse than burnt garlic though. So I always say to people, if you see a recipe and it tells you to add it all in at the same time, trust your chef instinct and say, you know what? No, I'm going to hold back on the garlic and wait and add it just a little bit later in the process.
I think Leah used to say, trust your chefness, or use your chefness.
The chefiness.
I see that Carrie left while I used the garlic press. She didn't want to witness it at all. And with this soup, so sometimes I really like to cook down my vegetables until they're really nice and brown. I'm sure you can see up here, They're not brown yet. We're kind of just sweating at this point. For this soup, I don't really need to brown my vegetables too much. I really just want to cook them down. You can see all this steam coming out. I like to tell people a lot, we want to cook our vegetables down before adding any other liquid because our vegetables have a high water content. Water doesn't taste like anything. I don't want my soup to taste watery. So I really want to sweat these, get a lot of that excess moisture out of my vegetables. So I'm concentrating the flavor of the vegetables and getting great flavor overall in my soup. And when we do add liquid back in, we're using a broth, something that's already flavored. So really making sure that this is going to be as delicious as possible and not taste like watery vegetables. Because once we add liquid in here, those vegetables are going to cook and soften, but those flavors are not going to concentrate on it. And so my vegetables have softened a bit. We are getting a little bit of browning in that pot. So this is my great opportunity to add my seasonings. So to kind of season our stew today, we have our garlic, we have tomato paste, love tomato paste in soup, and then we have a variety of spices. So again, at this point, everything is the same between the two stews. We have some curry powder, ground cumin, and paprika, and then just a little bit of salt in there. So I am going to add my tomato paste first. Really great tip is to cook down your tomato paste. It's pretty concentrated as it is. It's that tomato paste. But when we cook it down and it turns like a deep, rich, dark red color, again, we're concentrating those flavors even more. And this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons. I'm definitely using more than that. Again, we're using our chefness and doing just, what feels right. That 1 can of tomato paste, I think, has about 4 to 6 tablespoons of paste in it. So we just split it between the 2 soups. Why not? I don't want to deal with the rest of that tomato paste and figure out what to do with it when I'm done. So I'm just going to use the whole thing, go off recipe a little bit. And so now we're just going to give that a stir. We don't want our spices and our garlic to burn. So at this point, you will really want to keep an eye on this. You want to start to smell the garlic, the tomato paste, those spices, but it's really not going to take a long time. And I'm even going to turn my heat down a little bit. It's not going to take a long time for this to be ready for me to add my liquid to.
Emily, I was going to say, one of the things that I like to teach in our classes, particularly with our med students who tend to be very inexperienced in the kitchen, is just this idea of controlling the heat. So, oftentimes they're like, oh, the recipe says turn the heat to medium high. And then they think they can never touch the knob, again, later in the process. And I'm like, if, you got to use your senses. If you smell that it seems like it's, maybe getting a little too toasty, or if the color is getting too dark, turn the heat down. Oftentimes when people think they're like, oh, my food is sticking, I need more oil, no, you probably just need to turn the heat down.
Yeah. And sometimes, novice cooks will not even realize that they could just slide the pan off the burner.
Right.
You don't even have to turn the heat down. You could just slide the pan off the burner. But yeah, you have absolute control over that thermostat. So turn it to wherever you want it to be. And worth mentioning, I know chef developed these recipes, so I know the recipes are going to work, but recipes don't always work, do they? And so sometimes you have to use a little bit of judgment to determine what is the best, next step.
And something I want to point out that I did is I didn't want to interrupt Heather, but my pan was too hot and I don't want to put it on the table. If your pan's too hot and you can do it, add your liquid. It's going to immediately cool your pot down. I noticed that there was some sticking at the bottom of my pot. It got a little toasty. So you just add your liquid right away. You're going to hear that bubble, that sizzle. That's going to cool your pot down. You're going to be able to scrape up anything that is stuck to the bottom of your pan, and nothing's going to burn and everything's okay. And I think Rosen's still going to invite us back next year.
Those butane burners are not
They're
quite the same
strong.
as what you have at home.
So in this pot right here, my lentil and butternut squash stew, I added 8 cups of vegetable stock. You can add water if you want to, but we had veg stock, so we're using it. And then for my chicken stew, I added 6 cups of chicken broth. So maybe that's something that we made with our chicken bones that we had. Now this is where we're starting to kind of diverge. So to my lentil and butternut squash stew, I am gonna add 1 cup of green lentils. We love lentils. They are a legume, great source of fiber and protein. Don't need to pre-cook them. They will cook just fine in that soup. And then I'm going to add about a 1/2 pound of frozen butternut squash. So this is a vegetable. I didn't want to chop it. I don't like cutting up butternut squash. So we just bought it frozen. Going kind of back to what Heather was talking about, it being okay to have frozen vegetables. And I think we have a slide on this.
We do. We're going to get to it, I think, when you are done adding all these ingredients.
Okay.
Did you mention by any chance, because I was checking the chat, did you mention why you have more liquid in your vegetarian version?
Yeah, that's a great point. So in our vegetarian version with the lentils, I have 8 cups of broth. In my chicken stew, I only have 4 cups of broth. And that's because those lentils are going to about triple in size when they cook, and they really soak up a lot of liquid. So when I was first developing this recipe, it was just kind of like sludge at the end. It really soaked up too much liquid, and you can always add more at the end. But you really need a decent amount of liquid in there so that at the end, our stew, still actually has some broth to it and is not just like a lentil-y sludge. And so I have everything in my lentil stew. I'm gonna finish my chicken stew. We're gonna add 1 can of full fat coconut milk. That's gonna make this really nice and creamy. Spilled a little bit, it's fine. And then I'm going to add those chicken thighs that I shredded up earlier from my rotisserie chicken. Give that a stir, and these really just need to simmer. That chicken stew, because we're using frozen butternut squash, it's going to finish cooking in 10 minutes. We really just kind of want everything to heat through for all those veggies to get soft. The lentil stew is going to take about 15 minutes to cook. We're just looking for those lentils to be nice and soft. All right.
So I think this was the slide you were talking about that we were going to mention. So we've kind of covered some of this already for sure. I think a great point is that, we can cut down on food waste. Oftentimes when you buy something at the store, it comes in a size or, the way you have to buy it is really more than you need. Like if we were using fresh butternut squash here, we may have to buy a whole squash, but not necessarily need all of that. And yes, you could certainly cut it all up and freeze the leftovers yourself. But, the bag of the frozen pre-chopped additionally just lets you put it right back in the freezer and save it for the next recipe. You got anything you want to say?
Well, no, we had a question on the chat. I just want to throw it in there. Someone asked about these burners. I don't know the brand. Someone wanted to know, but I think a chef, you can find several different comparable brands, but something like that on your favorite online ordering service is about $40. And the cartridges you can get, maybe a pack of 4 for maybe $15. So it's inexpensive, but those things are temperamental and they're either really hot or really cold. So just fair warning.
So Emily, now I think we are at the point where you're going to sort of just review what the main differences are between these 2 recipes so we can get back to this conversation about energy density versus nutrient density.
Yeah, so I've kind of highlighted the main differences here, and I talked about them too. So when we're looking at that chicken and butternut squash stew, we are using chicken thighs. We did add a can of coconut milk for that nice creaminess. Pairs really well with all of those spices that we added. And we use chicken broth instead of vegetable broth. But again, you can really use whatever is available to you. Whereas on our lentil and butternut squash stew, this one is completely plant-based. So our protein is coming from our lentils that we're adding. We're using that vegetable broth or water. And at the end, we're going to finish it off with some greens. Both of them are going to get us of lemon as well.
Chef, I have a question about the coconut milk.
Yeah.
I know sometimes that can curdle if you boil the soup too hard. Is that a problem here?
That is something that can happen. And I think maybe I was supposed to add the coconut milk later. But I will say that for this chicken soup, because I pre-cooked those vegetables and because that frozen butternut squash is actually pre-cooked, it's not something that needs to simmer on the stove for, 30 plus minutes. This doesn't need to get super hot. We really just want to heat everything through. So in this case, I don't think I've ruined everything, but yes, if there's something that you are going to be cooking for a long time at a really high heat, save the coconut milk for the end.
Emily, we have a couple questions that just came in I want to get to real quick. So we have one person is asking about the type of coconut milk used. I know the kind that you used today came from a can. What do we think about substituting for the one that comes in like the Tetra Pak situation?
You could use that. It's not going to be quite as creamy and thick and not have the same flavor necessarily as that canned coconut milk. But if that's all you have, you could definitely use that. I would be careful. That might be even more susceptible to curdling at any kind of heat. So if you do want to use from the Tetra Pak, that like coconut milk beverage, that is something you definitely want to add right at the end.
And then we also have a question about whether we could use beans, barley, rice, any suggestions instead of using the lentils?
Oh, you can use whatever you want. You like beans, chickpeas, white beans, black beans, anything you like, whatever legume you like. If you're trying to keep it plant-based, go for it. I think it's all going to be good in there. I do like the lentils because they kind of break down a little bit and do thicken that stew, but I mean, beans can do that as well. If you're using canned beans, super easy. You don't even have to wait for them to cook. If you're using dried beans, I would recommend pre-cooking them before adding them to the stew. Otherwise, you're going to need way more liquid. They might cook up a little bit weird if you're doing it directly into the stew.
Lastly, we did have someone asking about doing like a cashew milk, like a homemade cashew milk situation. I think that would work, right? Like soak the cashews, blend them up to use as thickening.
Like thickening?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And like add some creaminess.
I don't see why not. Again, I would maybe add that at the end to prevent any curdling, especially a homemade kind of cashew thickening agent isn't going to have any stabilizers that keep it from separating. So I always say go for it. Whoever on Zoom
What's the worst that'll happen?
Let me know how it goes.
If you use a nut milk or something that's a little bit off the beaten path, the end result might be a textural change. It might be just a little bit different texture. The flavor is probably going to be amazing. Cashews taste great. So if you put cashew in, it's going to taste good. With the coconut milk, one thing you want to be careful of is some people confuse like a sweetened Coco Lopez type canned coconut product with coconut milk. If you're making a pina colada, that's what you want.
Yeah.
If you're making this, that's not what you want.
We don't want pina colada flavored stew? Really? I don't know.
I don't know, with a little pineapple in there, like a little, I don't know, pulled pork shoulder, maybe? Probably not. Okay.
Now we're at the Copacabana.
All right. And so I do just want to kind of highlight the differences in nutrition that we're going to see with these two stews. I'm going to finish up the stew later, still plate it up, but just want to highlight this now. So we have two nutrition facts. At a brief glance, you can probably start to guess which one belongs to which stew. But if we want to go to the next slide, we will see that top nutrition fact is for the chicken stew. The bottom is for the lentil. So a couple key things and differences in the nutrition labels I want to point out. Biggest thing you're probably going to notice first, because a lot of us look at it first, is the difference in calories. So that chicken stew has a little under double the amount of calories for the same serving size as that lentil stew. Now, I'm not going to say that one stew is necessarily better than the other. I'm not going to say that I'm going to necessarily recommend one over the other in a general sense. It really comes down to our patient's needs and what they're looking for. But we will see that chicken stew is higher in calories, a lot of that coming from the chicken thighs, that full fat coconut milk. It's just a little more concentrated, and we see that it is quite a bit higher in fat. We also see that our lentil stew is going to have 3 times the amount of fiber to it, and that is pretty much exclusively coming from the lentils that we're adding. Because remember, they both have the onions and the celery, the garlic, the butternut squash in there. So that difference in fiber is those lentils, a great, great source of fiber. And we're also seeing a difference in protein. So the stew with that chicken is going to be a bit higher in protein as well, but we still made sure that we were getting protein in that lentil and butternut squash stew at about 13 grams per serving. And I do want to mention, I said these were the same serving sizes. They're not. The lentil and butternut squash stew is a bit of a higher serving size, simply because it's more brothy. We added a lot more liquid to it, so you get kind of a bigger serving size with that. I'm still happy with the amount of protein in this stew. It's still going to be very filling, especially because it has a lot of fiber to it. And we do still have some fat to this stew. We're not trying to make it fat-free, but we see that with the addition of fat, that's really where we see that increase in calories. Heather, I think I'm ready.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Girl.
We have a question in the chat, but I want to see if Carrie will address it. Okay, so really quickly, as Emily gets ready for the next set of recipes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about when we might want to recommend more nutrient-dense meals. And then on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about when to recommend more energy-dense meals. So in my opinion, I think almost everyone can benefit from adding more nutrient density into their life, right? Obviously, we've got a list of conditions here that we know for sure can have benefit when we add more nutrient-dense foods. And, using a sustainable approach, well-balanced diet, we can do this in a really easy way. So some of the suggestions, that we have, and these probably aren't really new to people, but things like adding greens to your favorite pasta sauce. We can do things like bulking up traditionally meat-centric dishes, adding mushrooms or beans and legumes. Those of you that did the intro session on Thursday saw us putting that into practice by having spaghetti and meat sauce, but we add some lentils to it. We add some mushrooms, cut back a little bit on the meat. We can also add things like fruits and nuts to our morning oatmeal or our smoothie, or, any breakfast foods. Things like swapping in our whole grain bread when you're making your sandwich. That's an easy one. And then I love using avocado instead of mayonnaise in things like egg salad or chicken salad. Also, even just like as a sandwich spread, like Elizabeth did yesterday. Great, really easy ways to just add some more nutrient density.
I actually have a question because I want to know the answer to this. Is there ever a time that you wouldn't want a patient perhaps to have a higher nutrient density?
I mean, there's some conditions where certain nutrients, you want to be that you want to limit more. So for example, for our patients with renal disease, they often have to watch things like their potassium, which unfortunately we're getting a lot of potassium from our fruits and vegetables. So that can make it kind of tricky. That's really the main one that I can think of off the top of my head, where we do need to watch, certain nutrient dense foods, because it's going to affect other aspects of their condition.
Thank you, Chef.
Yeah, that was a great question. So then on the other side of this, when would it be appropriate to recommend more energy dense meals? So here I have a little list of conditions that oftentimes we may be worried about, things like malnutrition or, generally, too much weight loss. A lot of these, we might see loss of appetite or altered taste being part of the equation. And we know that those two things can obviously affect someone's intake. And so oftentimes I know, for me, when I was doing some of my rotations in the inpatient in the hospital, when we have somebody who is very, very sick and they don't, they're not able to eat a lot of things or tolerate a lot of things, it's like, let's just pump them full of calories as easy as we can. So if that means giving somebody something that might be normally thought of as not healthy, like a milkshake, we do it, right? Because sometimes it's just about getting more calories into the person. And of course, there are ways to also take something like milkshake and make it a little more nutrient dense at the same time. But we definitely want to make sure in a lot of these conditions that we are preventing malnutrition, promoting healing. And so oftentimes the additional calories and maybe also additional protein will be necessary.
Mhm. And that kind of ties back to what Kofi was talking about yesterday as well, where some families, when they know that they have limited access to food, try to make those meals as energy dense as possible. Because if I can spend the same amount of money on, just for example, a full fat Greek yogurt or a non-fat regular yogurt, well, the Greek yogurt's going to be more expensive. But if they're similar in price and I know that I can get kind of more calories for my dollar, sometimes that's what we need to do as well. So, if we can make something more energy dense without spending more money on it, sometimes that is also the best choice for our patients or clients.
All right, I think we're ready to move into our next recipe.
Yeah, so we got chicken round 2. We want to use up that entire chicken that we bought. We don't want any of it to go to waste. I just shredded all of it at once. I used some of the thighs in my soup, so I'm going to use other parts of it for some chicken salad. A great use of that leftover shredded meat. So we're going to do 2 ways. I'm going to start with our chicken and chickpea salad. So this is going to be a chicken salad that also has chickpeas in it. So we're just starting with, our standard can of chickpeas. They have been drained and rinsed off. We don't really want a lot of extra liquid in there. And I'm just going to pop that right into my bowl. And I'm now realizing why I needed a fork. I thought I didn't need one because I thought I wanted it for my lemons. So I'm just going to use kind of a big spoon. And we just, oh, this is working great. This is fine. We just want to kind of mash those chickpeas up so that they blend in nicely with the rest of the chicken and the seasonings and everything that we're adding to our salad.
By the way, can you guys smell the soup? It smells amazing, right?
You guys, I'm just going to say this is working way better than the fork to smash my chickpeas. I'm doing this from now on. This is great.
So why are you mashing those? Why not leave them intact?
Mashing them just so that texture, you got the skins in there. They look kind of shreddy and they just kind of visually blend in nicely with the chicken. Also, if we leave those chickpeas whole, like say you wanted to put the salad on a sandwich, you're more likely for those chickpeas to kind of just like pop out and roll away while you're trying to eat it. This makes them a little stickier as well.
Could you substitute a different bean?
Oh yeah, you could do, for this I would recommend a lighter colored bean, like a white bean, a cannellini, but if you wanted to use like a red kidney bean or a black bean, you could. Just visually, it's not going to look quite the same. And I'm also not fully mashing these. I do like to leave some kind of big just for the textural aspect of it. If we fully mash all of these beans, it's going to be kind of pasty, and that's not always the nicest texture when we're eating something. So we do want some variance in texture in those chickpeas. And now, a lot of the ingredients in these 2 recipes are very similar, but we're going to find that the amounts that we're using are quite different. So to my chickpeas, I do want to add some 2 stalks of celery, an entire apple, and we're going to do some red onion as well, only about a 1/4 cup. And I do have a fun trick for red onion. Whenever you need about a 1/4 cup of red onion, that's going to be about a 1/4 of an onion. You can see that my onion is already cut in half. I am not going to be cutting it in half again in order to get my 1/4 of a red onion, because it makes it a little less stable to cut. It's more likely to kind of like slide around under your hands. So you know how when we cut into an onion, we kind of make these slices into our onion going all the way up to the root. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm only going to cut up about halfway up my onion. So I'm still only using a 1/4 of an onion, but just maybe a different 1/4 of it than we might normally think. And I'm making these slices pretty small. I don't like a lot of like big hunks of red onion. So I've only cut up about halfway up my onion. And then just like we normally dice an onion, going against the slices I made. So now I'm just kind of left with, a half half of a red onion. This is going to be much easier for me to cut later on if I want to chuck this in my fridge. It's just going to be easier for me to deal with when I come back to it versus a quarter of a red onion, which is kind of hard to cut. And got my bench scraper. Thanks again, Cecilia, for that. And I'm going to cut my apple next when I get to the celery, if y'all want to talk about something. You guys already watched me cut celery, but for the onion or apple, for our apple, we do want to slice this or dice it pretty small. So I have kind of a trick for that too. Oftentimes our reaction to cut an apple is to, cut the 4 sides off and we're left with these big chunks, but then how do we dice it small from there? So what I like to do instead is just start on one side, but start making kind of thin slices of my apple. So I have these thin slices instead, and I'm going to do that all the way around. That way, when I go to dice my apple, I have these thin pieces already. So I can cut all of these just into some nice apple sticks, just like this. Kind of reminds me of that jicama slaw we had yesterday. And then I can dice this nice and small so it fits into my chicken salad really nicely. That's just like a little trick I came up with because I always kind of struggled with cutting apple slices small until I figured out you just slice off the width of the apple that you need for your dice.
One of the things she's done that I really like here is she left the skin on the apple, both for the color and a little bit of contrasting texture, and it's nutrients. So you could take the skin off, but you don't need to.
Yeah, I almost never take the skin off of my apples unless it's for like a pie or something like that.
I actually even like to leave it on when baking, to be honest.
Yeah, I've done apple pies with the skin on. Honestly, at the time I thought I was being lazy, but I like the result.
Sometimes being lazy pays off.
Yeah. Also, fiber.
So a chef I really respect once said to me, work smart, not hard. I still work hard, but I try to work smart.
That's like me with the garlic. I just refuse to buy the pre-minced garlic, even though I hate cutting it. Sometimes we're just a little stubborn, but we work smart in other ways.
The other thing with garlic is if you buy whole bulbs of garlic with the skin on, you don't have to refrigerate it and it keeps for quite a while. So you can keep it on your counter, in a basket with other things like onions that don't need to be refrigerated necessarily either until they're peeled.
Chef, I actually have a question for you now that we're back to the garlic conversation.
Okay.
What about when you buy the garlic and you get it home and you go to use it, you realize it has that green sprout coming out? What's your opinion on this? Because sometimes now I find that it's more common that we get that kind of garlic in the store. And I think that indicates it's a little older, correct?
It does, because remember, the garlic bulb is a root. And that green sprout means that it's trying to stalk, it's trying to grow. And that happens over time. It's not something that happens immediately. So for me, if I see that, I don't panic, I just cut it off.
Okay, so you do like to take it out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, within reason. I'm not going to pick through a pound of garlic to get every little speck of green out. But
Okay.
I might, I would probably take an extra second to cut that off.
I do too. I just wondered if I was being too extra.
I'm lazy.
No.
I don't take the green part.
You
out.
don't? Okay.
No. All right, so we have our veg chopped. So in my bowl right now, I have my mashed chickpeas, my red onion, my apple, and my celery. And my bowl is already pretty full, and I haven't even added the most expensive ingredient, that chicken. So we are going to add the chicken at this point. This is the chicken breast, or the white meat that I shredded up earlier. I like shredded chicken in my chicken salad. I kind of like the texture of that better. Is the mic being weird? But you do whatever you like. And for some of our seasoning, we're just going to do a little salt and pepper. I really like curry powder in chicken salad. And just so we can visually see the difference when we're done, I'm going to add about a tablespoon of curry powder to that chicken salad. We're going to add a bit of Dijon mustard. This is totally optional. Everything in chicken salad is optional. You make it how you like it. But I just kind of like that tang that mustard adds. And then instead of mayo, which is the traditional kind of binding dressing ingredient in our chicken salad, for this one, we're going to add some low-fat plain yogurt. And this is about a half cup. I like that yogurt too, because it's got a nice tanginess to it, some acidity there. It helps to kind of tie those flavors together. And last couple things, I have some pecans that I'm going to chop up really quickly. The nuts are totally optional here, but they do add a nice textural element, some nice crunch, some nice healthy fats as well, and some fiber. Love fiber. So we're gonna add those to our salad. And the last thing we're going to add is lemon. Lemon is one of my favorite ingredients in the kitchen. Anytime you taste something and you're like, I don't know, this needs something, this needs a little bit of salt, try adding lemon first. The acidity there is going to tie all of those ingredients together. And I just love the way it tastes. So I'm going to squeeze that lemon right into my bowl. Also, tip for one of these juicers, the cut side goes down. This guy's a little small, but we do that cut side down so all that juice comes out.
It's counterintuitive because the way the shape of the
Yeah.
thing is it wants you to put the round side down. But if you do that, you're not going to get much juice out. I got one for Christmas about 15 years
Lemon
ago,
soup.
no instructions. And I said, this thing sucks. Someone said, dummy, turn the fruit around. Oh,
And so we have, how much chicken do we have in here? About a half pound, 8 ounces. Yeah, so only 8 ounces of chicken in this bowl, but I'm sure you can see on the camera right now, my bowl is very full because we added a ton of vegetables. We added that can of chickpeas. It didn't really take me too long to chop everything up, and I'm getting a ton of servings out of this. So if I want to make my lunches for the week, I have a bigger family to feed. This came together pretty quickly, and I'm getting a lot of servings out of it. And again, chicken salad, there are no rules. If you want to make it a little bit differently, that's totally okay. If you want it a little creamier than this, add a little more yogurt to it. I think it already smells good from that curry powder. So I'm going to plate a little bit of that up really quickly. And then we'll move on to our more traditional chicken salad.
Emily, I really like this version because of, I think you kind of said this, but the chickpeas, they're really cost effective. So you can really stretch your dollar as well by sort of bulking up a traditionally meat-centric dish by adding these other non-meat elements, which I think is really nice, both from a cost perspective, but also a nutrition perspective.
Yeah, I think adding a can of beans to something is one of the easiest things that you can do to add volume, to add protein, to add fiber, and it's only going to cost you about $1. It adds another serving as well. So that is our chicken and chickpea salad. Next, we have our kind of this is a really bad name, I'm sorry. If anyone has a better name for this other chicken salad, I welcome you to let me know. But this is going to be our higher protein, more energy dense chicken salad. So instead of that white meat, we are going to use some chicken thighs from that rotisserie chicken. And these are kind of diced, so it has a little bit of a different look to it. We're still adding red onion and celery, but in smaller quantities. So here we only have about 2 tablespoons of each. So in this scenario, the chicken, the protein is a little more concentrated in this. And for our binding agents, we are going to add some whole milk Greek yogurt to this. Again, about a half cup. And then we're going to add some mayo. Mayo is not evil. It's not the worst thing. It's just eggs and oil emulsified together. It is really creamy. A lot of people are familiar with it, so they do kind of like to see that in there as well. And I often like that creaminess that it is adding to our chicken salad. Our seasonings are going to be similar, a little salt and pepper. We're going to add that Dijon mustard still. I'm going to skip the curry powder on this one just so when we come to look at things later, you can visually tell the difference between them. Still going to add those nuts. Got our protein and fiber in here. And then our lemon. Chef Jay, I have a question for you. Are there
Sure.
any like non-traditional seasonings you ever like to add to chicken salad?
Well, as you were making this, the one thing I was thinking, I made chicken salad last week, and something I really love in chicken salad is fresh tarragon.
Ooh,
Really love fresh tarragon. And instead of apple, it doesn't have quite as much texture, but I like a little bit of fresh mango.
Oh,
Yum.
where are mango people
I
at?
feel like the mango with the curry powder would be really nice.
Oh, it would
too.
mango
Ooh,
and
that'd
curry. I
be
mean, that's a
good.
That would
classic
be a good
combination.
combo for sure. Yeah, I like the tarragon. I feel like tarragon is one of those herbs. It's very strong. You kind of have to use it in
Very little, isn't
moderation.
it? Yeah. Yeah, it's an anisette, so it has that black licorice-esque flavor. And personally, I don't like black licorice candy, but anisettes in like an herbal application have a really, really, really nice aromatic quality. You get it in fennel as well. That's another anisette. Chervil is another one. In nature, there's lots of things that actually naturally, because of flavors and tastes, are all based on chemicals. There's, chemical senses. Your sense of smell is a chemical sense, right? And so black licorice is, I don't ask me the chemical because I don't know the name of it, but lots of things have it. And if you can apply that, use it with aromatic qualities and pair it with other flavors that work well, it really creates a nice, just floral almost quality.
Yeah. We also have a comment in the chat. Someone is suggesting the raw green mango as well.
Ooh, that
For
would
some
be good.
crunch. Yeah, I think that would be another nice option.
Or
Yeah.
papaya, green papaya is
yeah.
really good too.
Or even honestly, like the chayote that
right.
Elizabeth used yesterday, or Merlaton if you're from Louisiana. I think that would be good. Oh my gosh, we're gonna do so much with chicken salad.
Blank canvas, really. I mean,
so I have finished that other more high protein chicken salad, and you can see that there's a lot less in the bowl because we didn't really bulk it up with those vegetables. We didn't bulk it up with the chickpeas either. Still pretty easy to make, but we're getting a lot less servings out of this. And I'm just gonna plate
Emily,
that
I
up
think
too.
while you're finishing plating that up, I'm going to talk a little bit about our dark meat versus light meat poultry. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So if you were with us virtually last year at the conference, Emily and I did a presentation then as well. And I did talk about this, but I wanted to just bring it back up since we're doing chicken again. Here in this chart, you see we have a comparison between our boneless, skinless chicken breast. We're comparing that against the boneless, skinless chicken thigh. And then I'm also showing you the bone-in, skin-on varieties, just so that we can get a sense of what we're dealing with here. Chicken is the #1 protein choice in this country. Everyone loves chicken, and chicken breast is the most popular poultry item. Now, as you can see here, we know this already. Chicken thigh has a higher fat content than chicken breast. It also has higher iron, zinc, B6, and B12. And I just question whether that higher fat content is enough for us to say that we would not recommend this to people to eat. When looking at this, you see we're comparing a 4-ounce serving. We only have 1.5 additional grams of total fat and 0.5 grams of saturated fat. In addition, the thing that's not shown here is that we're also in that chicken thigh, we're getting 1 gram of polyunsaturated fat and 1.5 grams of monounsaturated fat. So we're getting some good fats along with the saturated fat. And as you see here as well, the price per pound is cheaper. These prices are coming from Walmart. I looked them up just back in April. So I don't know, how much that has changed, but I would just sort of say from a health perspective, I think there's no reason to demonize chicken thighs. From a culinary perspective,
They're beautiful.
They're the best. At dinner last night, I was proclaiming my love for chicken thighs and talking about how I pretty much only exclusively eat chicken thighs now. I will eat a chicken breast if it's around, but I'm not going to go out of my way to buy it personally. I really like chicken thighs. They're more forgiving to cook. I say when people are scared of cooking chicken, they're like, oh, I'm going to undercook it. Or then they think they're going to undercook it and they end up overcooking it. a chicken thigh, you kind of can't overcook it almost because of that additional insulation of the fat. You have a little bit of an easier time, I think, from that perspective. Do you have anything you?
No, I was just going to agree. And, the darker meat is more flavorful, point blank. It is. And meat. And here's another thing, like from my wife, she doesn't like meat on the bone. But one thing that chefs know is meat cooked on the bone is more flavorful. So it is worth the extra step. Even if you're buying a rotisserie chicken, that breast meat cut off the bone is going to taste better. But thigh meat in general is just a little bit more robust. Some people, they think they don't like dark meat. I'm convinced it's just a preparation thing. You have dark meat correctly cooked, it's amazing.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to mention is most of the fat content is coming from the skin. You can see that from our columns on the right there, right? So if you want to cook a whole chicken or your chicken pieces, bone in, skin on, one way to just cut back on that fat content is to remove the skin before you eat it. You can get the culinary benefit of the insulation of the skin and that flavor while you're cooking, but just take it off before you eat it.
Absolutely. One thing just to mention real quick too, we talked earlier about the time it takes to roast a whole chicken. There's a way to make that a little bit faster, and you can actually buy it prefabricated, which is called a spatchcock chicken. Spatchcock, that's all I do now when I roast chicken. I always do it this way because I'm convinced it's better and it's faster, but it requires a little bit of effort unless you buy the chicken already done this way. In a spatchcock chicken, the spine is removed and the breast, the whole thing is flat. Cooks much faster. And in fact, it works. If you use a grill, you can cook it on indirect heat, put it skin side up, the cut side down, and indirect heat, it'll cook in it'll take about 15% of the time away, maybe even 20. So it's not halving your time, but it's saving you time, and it works great.
Just a couple more things before we move on. We have a comment here about trimming the fat on the chicken thigh being a bit of a chore. Does anybody have any thoughts on easier ways to trim the fat? I know what my opinion is.
I guess so. I will just kind of take off whatever I can with my hands. So if I can pull it off easily with my hands, which you can usually do with fat, I will do that. I also like to remember that a lot of that fat, depending on how you're cooking that meat, is going to render off. So like if you're just cooking those in a pan, on a sheet pan in the oven, you'll see a lot of that fat does render out of the meat and is left over in your pan. So I try not to spend too much time or go too crazy trimming the fat because a lot of it cooks off anyways.
And I will say one of the things I had in my notes, and I just reminded myself of it, is that when you have that higher fat content in the meat, in theory, we might be able to eliminate some of our other things that would add fat to the dish, like breading or butter or cheese sauces, if we're getting that rich fatty content from the meat itself versus, sure, like chicken cordon bleu with a chicken breast where it's all breaded and fried and coated in cheese. Yeah, delicious. But we could have a more simply cooked chicken thigh and kind of get that similar satisfaction level, I guess I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as cordon bleu goes, you could do a variation of that where you eliminate the breading, and that's going to cut down a lot of the calories too, and roast instead of fry. But it's still not as good as eliminating that extra, I guess, ham.
Yeah. The ham, the cheese sauce, all that good stuff. Another comment, just really quick, and then we will move on, is just that when we eat both the white and the dark meat, we're being more economical overall, right? Like if you think about how much chicken breast is being sold in the store, well, someone has to eat the dark meat because it's got to go somewhere, right? So, I do think that's a good point, is that because from a nutrition standpoint, I just think it's gotten such a bad rap over the years, probably dating back to our, anti-fat 90s situation. But, I just like to point out, look, it's really not that much fattier. So maybe we don't need to worry.
I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, me neither. Actually, Emily, I think we're going to review your chicken salad.
Oh, nutrition. Yeah, we can review the nutrition of the chicken salad, and then my soup's actually done, so we can finish that as well. So again, we have 2 nutrition facts labels up here. If you kind of look at a couple key areas, you might start to notice some differences and guess which one belongs to which chicken salad. One thing I do want to note on this one specifically is the difference in our number of servings. So the lower label is our chicken and chickpea salad. We have 3 more servings of that chicken and chickpea salad than we got out of our high protein chicken salad. And that is from that can of beans that we added, those extra vegetables that we were adding. Because if you have a whole apple, why not add the whole thing? If you are already buying a head of celery, why not add a couple extra stalks of it? So we're not spending too much extra money to get a lot of these extra servings out of our chicken salad. And right away, again, we will notice that the high protein energy dense salad, again, has about twice as many calories as our chicken and chickpea salad, because I'm really trying to show you kind of 2 extreme ends of that spectrum there. That high protein chicken salad, a lot of those calories are coming from extra fat in that, coming from, yes, the chicken thighs, but also that full fat Greek yogurt that we used and the little bit of mayo that we added as well. But this one is going to be significantly higher in protein at 21 grams per serving, coming from the chicken, but also that Greek yogurt that we added. Whereas our chicken and chickpea salad is higher in fiber at 3 grams per serving, and a serving is only half a cup. It's not a lot of food to get that 3 grams of fiber. Whereas our high protein one, not a lot of veg in there, really no fiber per serving. We do have about 9 grams of protein in that chicken and chickpea salad. I would, if you wanted to eat this as a meal, recommend pairing it with something else that's going to kind of increase the protein content of that meal. But we can often get that from, some nice slices of a really whole grain, hearty bread. That's going to add a couple grams of fiber to our overall meal. And back to our stew, we're going to finish things off. So my chicken stew really didn't need to cook too much. We were just kind of heating it through. My coconut milk did not curdle, so I did not ruin anything. And on my lentil stew, it's hard to tell from where y'all are, but a lot of that liquid has reduced. It was a lot of liquid that we added, 8 whole cups of broth. Those lentils have really sucked up a lot of that liquid, and it's really not too brothy at the end of the day. And my lentils are cooked. I can tell because the skin of the lentils is starting to split away from those. And some of you may have noticed, I have a blender right here. As far as presentation goes, one of my favorite things to do with a soup is to actually blend about half of it. And it gives you this nice creamy appearance. It's gonna make it look kind of similar to the stew with coconut milk in it without me having to add the coconut milk. And those lentils are nice and starchy. So this is also going to thicken up my stew a bit. And we're using a Vitamix blender today. Thanks, Vitamix. But this is so soft, like you don't need a high-powered blender to do this. However, I do want to touch on something very important, and that is blender safety when you are blending a hot liquid, because we've probably seen or experienced someone is blending something and the top blows off and then we have soup everywhere and it's a mess. This is very hot. I don't want it all over me. So if you are blending a hot liquid such as a soup, first of all, I've had this off for a couple minutes, so it's not boiling hot anymore, but still pretty hot. You do not want to fill it more than halfway up your blender because this is already very steamy inside. We don't want to create a lot of pressure from that steam in our blender. So we're not going to fill it up more than halfway. And then all blenders have some kind of top that can come off. The Vitamix are nice because they actually have built-in kind of vents. So as long as you turn it a specific way, we'll see that a lot of that steam is escaping through the vents. You could fully take it off too if you want and just cover the top of your blender with a towel. We want the steam to escape again because we don't want to build up a lot of pressure in that blender base. And I'm going to blend this up. I'm really sorry if this is loud in my microphone, but Love that Vitamix. All right, so it doesn't take very long. This told me it took me 13 seconds to blend that up, and we can see it's lightened a lot in color. It looks kind of creamy. So when I add this back into my stew, it's going to make my stew nice and thick and have kind of a creamy appearance to it. This is totally optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to get your blender dirty. Totally understand, but it's something I really like to do. And both of these are really hot, so I'm just going to finish them off really quickly. That lentil stew is going to get some kale in it. I feel like kale has been mentioned a lot during this conference, but you could add any green. I like kale in a stew like this because it is a bit heartier, kind of holds up a bit better to the heat. To separate this kale stems from the leaves, I just kind of gather all of the leaves in one hand and rip that stem off with the other. I like to put these in smoothies because I don't like wasting those stems. And I think kale kind of tastes like apples in a smoothie. I really like it. So I'm just ripping this apart, not really spending too much time on it. And I'm just going to cut up these leaves to be nice, like bite-sized pieces, and add that to my lentil stew. I'm just going to kind of pile everything together, roll it up, and then just chop it nice and thin. If there's a little stem in there, it's okay, as long as you're cutting it kind of small. Just a couple more chops for good measure. Now this is off, but it's still very hot. So when I add this raw kale to my soup, it really doesn't take very long for those leaves to soften. So I don't need to keep this kind of like hot on the stove. And while that kale is cooking down a little bit, I'm just gonna add some lemons to each pot, and then we're done with that stew.
Instead of kale, what about like chard or spinach or another green?
Oh yeah, you could add any green that you like. Something I do too, if you ever have salad greens or like spinach or anything at home and you're not using it before it goes bad, take that bag of greens, chuck the whole thing in the freezer. I do that all the time. You can totally freeze raw greens and then use it in something like a soup where it's going to cook right away, or put it in a smoothie. Anywhere where the greens don't need to look nice, you can use some frozen greens too. And again, I'm adding some lemon juice to this. Stews, especially stews, chilies, I feel like we like spend all this time, adding all these flavoring ingredients. We really want them to taste good. And then kind of at the end of cooking, you taste it and you're like, I added so much to this. Why does it taste like nothing? And then you start to think, okay, I guess I need to add, a little more salt to this to bring the flavors out. Add a little lemon, lime, apple cider vinegar, anything acidic to it, taste it again, and you'll go, oh, there's all the spices I added to my soup. I can taste them now. And these are done. So they really didn't take me a lot of time to prep because I utilized that frozen butternut squash instead of chopping one on my own. And I'm just gonna plate these up. We can see that that stew really thickened up a lot, and that kale is already a nice bright green color and soft. And we'll do our chicken stew as well with the same ladle, because doesn't really matter.
Emily, I think while you're finishing that up, I will talk a little bit about dairy fat as we transition to one of our last recipes. So the reason we're transitioning to dairy fat is because we're going to be using some dairy in the upcoming smoothies. And so I wanted to also take a look at the comparison nutritionally between our different levels of dairy. So you see we have our whole milk listed, our low fat 1%, as well as the skim and the skim / fat free. I grew up drinking skim milk because I grew up in the low fat, no fat craze of the 90s. But I personally have transitioned to going back to milk that has a little bit more fat content in it. And the thing that I really wanted to touch on with this is that, I think, historical evidence supports that higher saturated fat intake leads to increased serum cholesterol, which also leads to increased risk of heart disease and potentially high, and also when we have the higher saturated fat intake, we also have higher calorie intake, which can also potentially lead to weight gain. But I think it's important that we understand that the relationship between saturated fat and cholesterol is a little bit more complicated than just that basic understanding. And I think this is a good way to look at the concept of like not all calories are created equal. And so what I think is interesting here is that if we think about it as a collection of components, not just calories and fat, we have to look at the food item. It's a complex matrix. It's got more going on than just pinpointing like, well, whole milk is higher in calories and higher in saturated fat, thus should be avoided. There are also higher unsaturated fats in our whole milk. And in addition, I was looking at this research study and they got really into some like beyond my level of comprehension in terms of the way they were breaking down the different types of fats. But when you take the fat out of milk, you're taking all of the fat out. And so we're losing the good with the so-called bad at the same time. And I know that we've probably all in this room are aware that the newer research does indicate that higher dairy fat might be better. In addition, I think it's important to note that that type of dairy is also an important thing. So we don't necessarily want to think of things like ice cream and cream-based sauces in the same category that we might put yogurt or, our aged fermented cheeses. So I don't know. I think this is kind of interesting. Also, just as a reminder, fat is essential for vitamin absorption. And also we know it is more satiating. So in theory, maybe we can get by with a smaller portion of our dairy when we do the higher fat content. Are you ready, Emily?
I am ready.
Okay, sweet. So speaking of
Don't mind
which,
me.
we're gonna put some dairy in our smoothies today.
Yeah, so we're gonna make some smoothies 2 ways. I am a big fan of smoothies just because sometimes I have a hard time getting all the vegetables I need. So this is a way I like to get vegetables in my diet, and a lot of people find it to be, a nice way to get more fruits and vegetables into their diets as well. So we're gonna do a smoothie 2-way. Again, I didn't do a great job naming these, so if anyone else has better name ideas, would love to hear them. We're going to start with our smoothie on the right first, our nutrient dense smoothie. And we can see that these are pretty similar. So we're going to start on both of them with a cup of frozen mango. Again, just utilizing frozen fruits. Pretty easy. They're generally pretty affordable. And then our other kind of solids that are going in is our frozen butternut squash. So maybe we didn't use our entire bag for the soups that we made. We can use some in our smoothie. I like the squash mango combo because they're a similar color, and the squash has a bit of a starchiness to it, and it gives you a really nice texture in a smoothie, kind of like how a banana gives you a really nice smooth texture in a smoothie. I find we get that a little bit from that frozen butternut squash as well. Do not use raw butternut squash in here. Even if you have a really high powered blender, it's not going to be the same. And then we're actually going to add some frozen carrots. These are the really cute, crinkle cut frozen carrots. We're going to add those to our smoothie as well. You could do raw carrot in there. I find that it has kind of a grainy, strange texture to it. So frozen carrots or carrots that you freeze yourself, because these are already cooked, give us a really nice texture. Again, in that smoothie, it's all about that texture. Because these are frozen, we don't need to add ice. I hate adding ice to smoothie. I don't know. I always end up with one really big ice cube in there, and it kind of throws the whole thing off. Now for our liquid on this one, we're just going to use water. Water is maybe boring, but kind of my favorite liquid to add to a smoothie because I'm usually adding so much other stuff. I don't want it to be too thick on my tongue, so the water kind of balances everything out. And then we are going to add about 1 cup of plain low-fat yogurt to this for kind of our creaminess and our protein in that smoothie. And then I like to add spices to a smoothie. This does actually call for fresh ginger. We didn't have it. We're using dried ginger. It's still going to be delicious. So we're going to add a little ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a little bit of turmeric as well, just for a nice bright color. And I do like that bit of earthy flavor that it adds. And then I'm going to blend that up quickly, and we'll plate that up and see how it looks. Oh no, just going to turn that off and back on.
Do we have
We're
a
plugged in.
incompatible base and top situation?
Oh no, we're incompatible.
Hey, Carrie.
This is embarrassing. We should have tested that first. Do you want to just rinse that out for me really quick? Great. So that's one smoothie. I'm going to talk about the other
talk
smoothie.
about some other things before you blend.
I can talk about the other smoothie while we're waiting for that. So our other smoothie also is going to have a base of mango, but for our liquid, instead of water, we are going to use some whole milk. So it is going to make it a bit thicker, a bit creamier, but it's also going to be adding some fat and some protein to that smoothie. So if we're kind of worried about how much protein is in our smoothie, adding that milk can help. It's just a really easy way to get it. We're doing the same seasonings in there. And then we're going to use some whole milk Greek yogurt. And you may have noticed that we've been using, yogurt in a lot of different places. And that's kind of one of the easiest ways to vary the amount of calories, fat, protein in our dishes. If we want something creamy, is the type of yogurt that we're using. So we're opting for that Greek yogurt, which is thicker and higher in protein than regular yogurt. Again, to add more protein to that high protein, energy dense smoothie. And way at the bottom, you might notice something maybe a little different that's going to go in there, and that's going to be some silken tofu. We're using silken because it is really smooth. It blends very easily, but this is a way to add some plant-based protein to a smoothie that's not really going to affect the texture too much. So that's just another way we can add a little extra burst of protein in there. It doesn't have to be silken. It's just something that I personally like to put in there. The silken tofu is also generally shelf stable when we buy it. So if we don't have a lot of space in our refrigerator to store things, if we live in New York and have a really, really tiny fridge like me, fridge space is at a premium. That silken tofu is nice, and blender is nice to keep in the cabinet.
Chef Leah to the rescue. While we get that set up, I'm going to pose a question that has come up in the chat. So I'm actually just going to read this question because I do sort of think it's worded well. So it says, can the panel address the concerns that blending your fruits and vegetables destroys the fiber matrix of these nutrient-dense foods? Fiber in these foods is known to support slower absorption, slow the glucose release, and support the gut microbiome. Is this overblown or is it a risk? And I think we talked about this a bit yesterday in the other skills building session. I think this came up, if I recall correctly. But so what do we think? Is this worth considering that if we blend our fruits and vegetables, we lose the fiber?
As far as I know, that's not really going to have an effect on the overall fiber content of the smoothie because it's still a non-digestible starch. Blending it's not going to make us digest it anymore. As far as I know, I've not seen anything that indicates otherwise.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference between juicing and blending and keeping the whole product intact, like not intact, but in the dish.
when we're juicing, if any of you have like used a juicer, I think there's one at the hotel, you kind of get all of these solids at the end of it and don't usually consume them with your juice. That's really where a lot of that fiber is going. Whereas this, we are using everything. We are not taking anything out. All of those solids, all of that fiber is still left in our smoothie. I'm going to blend this now, if that's okay.
Go ahead. And then I'll ask you my next question. Oh no.
It's okay because Carrie brought me another base. Everything's fine, you guys. This isn't embarrassing at all.
Well, while you're getting that set up, we do just have another comment here. And I actually I'm agreeing. Patricia in the comments, I have a similar experience to her. And that is that she thinks that smoothies sometimes don't keep her feeling full for very long, even with more protein and fiber added. And she's wondering if this is common. She thinks of smoothies as being pre-digested. I will say I have a similar malady. Like when I drink a smoothie in the morning for breakfast, I know I do tend to get hungry for lunch sooner. But
yeah, I mean, you could always pair it with something else. So you could pair it with something that maybe has a little carbohydrate to it, just to kind of balance things out. Because here we're getting fiber, we're getting some carbohydrates and fat and protein, but you could pair it with like a nice piece of toast with peanut butter on it to kind of make it a little more filling. And everyone's different too. You don't have to have this on its own. It could be a snack, something to tide you over. It really varies person to person. So to those people that don't like smoothies, they find they don't keep them full, I would say you don't have to drink a smoothie. Or, if this is your way to get more fruits and vegetables into your diet, see if you can pair something else with it to keep you full.
I like to add, we're going to talk about this later, but I like to add oats to my smoothie because I find that if I don't have a starchy carb, I notice an issue for me personally. I need a starchy carb involved. So oats are a good way to do that.
I'm going to blend this.
Yeah.
Now.
Woo!
Yay.
Also, fun fact, I don't think you have to hold blenders on the base anymore, but it is just my kind of instinct. We did a training with Vitamix once and they were like, don't do that. And I was like, it feels wrong not to. So this is our nutrient dense smoothie. And I'm going to use the same blender. I like this little shaking thing to make sure I don't drip. I'm going to use the same blender for both. I'm just going to empty the rest out into here because we're using pretty much the same ingredients anyways. My trick for cleaning blenders, if you hate to clean your blender like I do, here's what you do. You fill your blender up with warm soapy water, run it on high, empty it out, rinse it out, you're good. You don't have to stick your hand in there, try to clean around the blade. That's the best way to clean your blender. And if you stain your blender with turmeric, which I have also done before, it does come out eventually when you clean it like that. Just fun fact. All right, so we're making our other smoothie now. I've already kind of gone over it. I've added my mango, my butternut squash, no carrot in this one. We're just kind of upping some of those other solids that we're adding. I'm adding my whole milk Greek yogurt to that. Sorry, we're adding our whole milk Greek yogurt to that. And then we're gonna add our tofu and our spices. And we're rocking and rolling. We have a smoothie.
One thing that I wanted to mention when you were talking about why you don't like to add ice and the frozen fruit, one of my favorite things to do is buy fruit in season when it's fresh and most delicious and then freeze it myself. I always keep bags of frozen fruit as well so that I have them on hand for like emergency smoothie purposes. But I love buying, and I think like, something like a mango, you might have it in the fridge. And if it's starting to go bad and you're thinking, well, now I'm not going to be able to use it in, the way I had initially planned, you can cut it up and freeze it yourself. I like to cut it up, put it on a sheet tray so that it kind of freezes on the outside, then transfer it to a plastic bag.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite thing to do is make my own frozen fruit. Depending on the season, fresh fruit might actually be cheaper than that frozen fruit. I know where I live, frozen fruit is actually very expensive. A small bag of frozen mango that's like not even ripe and doesn't taste good is going to be like $5 or $6. Whereas sometimes I can find a mango on sale for $1 a piece and I'm able to freeze that myself. I know it's ripe. I know it's delicious. I just, like Heather says, lay it out on a sheet tray or a plate or anything that fits in your fridge. Once it's solid, put that in a bag or, some kind of Tupperware container. You have your own frozen fruit that actually tastes good, is nice and ripe, and costs you a lot less. I'm going to blend this up real quick.
And by using frozen fruit, you eliminate the need for adding ice.
Right.
Yes.
And this fruit, I mean, this has been sitting now for a while. We pulled it out of the freezer this morning, but I think normally, Emily, your smoothies would come out a little thicker, right?
Yes.
So this has kind of gotten a little defrosted while we were getting started. Another thing I was just thinking while you were blending, Emily, is that if you find a smoothie concoction that's like your go-to, another idea you could do is to sort of make, bags that you keep in the freezer of all of the components ready to go. So you could make a quick smoothie by just like dumping everything. So you don't have to measure it out every time.
Yeah.
That could be a good idea to save time. And then I was also wondering about, what do you think? I know, Emily, I know you do this because I used to work with you and I know you used to bring in smoothies all the time, but do we think there's any benefit or concern for like making a bigger batch of a smoothie and then saving some for later? And what do you recommend? Like, would you put it back in the freezer? Do you try to limit it to like a 1-day storage time?
I am, if you guys haven't realized by now, extremely lazy when it comes to cooking. Love to cook, still lazy about it. I actually have, can you see this? I do happen to have a blender that's pretty big and about this size. So I will fill it up just with a ton of fruits, vegetables, whatever is in my fridge or freezer. And I do make a big batch. And I generally portion it into about 12 to 16 ounce portions. And I will drink those throughout the week. For me personally, I don't mind that it's not ice cold and have that frozen texture anymore. But you could put those in the freezer and kind of let them thaw the night before. If that's, something you're okay with doing, you don't mind the different texture as it sits.
So, I had her take that and wash it one more time since we didn't test the food processor, just in case we need to use that again. So
Great.
We'll be ready, but hopefully no more technical difficulties. Okay, sorry. I think I'm behind on the slides.
So I think we can go over the nutritional differences between the two now. So again, that high energy, density smoothie, if we go to the next slide, is going to have about twice as many calories as that more nutrient dense smoothie. But we're also seeing a big difference in that protein. And if you're someone that can get away with having this as a meal, you do want to make sure you have a decent amount of protein in there to keep you full and satisfied. That nutrient dense smoothie is also pretty low per serving on fat. If we're using a low fat or a non-fat yogurt, we're really not seeing any there. So that's kind of decreasing the satiety of that smoothie. So again, when we're looking at calories, I'm not saying one is better than the other. It really depends on our needs. If someone wants a snack, maybe we go for the nutrient dense meal. Hey, this is just a great way, easy way for you to get some more fruits and veggies in your diet. But if you want this for a meal, you want something you can kind of prep ahead of time, is really easy to take with you on the go, let's make it sure it's a little more satiating and satisfying for you.
And I just kind of wanted to comment on what was asked earlier about maybe losing some of the value if it is blended up. If someone is going to get these nutrients in a smoothie or not at all, wouldn't you rather they get some than not at all?
Yeah, that's always my kind of response to when people ask me, someone asked me once, are older strawberries lower in vitamins? And I said, I genuinely don't know, but if you're worried that these strawberries are going to be slightly lower in some vitamins, if that's going to cause you to not eat the strawberries ever, I still want you to eat them. I still want you to eat that produce. Even if I don't know if the nutrients are maybe a little bit less, if the answer is don't eat it at all or eat something that's maybe a little lower nutrients, we want them to eat that. We want them to get that nutrition in their diet.
Thank you. That was an excellent point. Real quick, before we move on to our last recipe, we did just want to mention that we may have folks who are avoiding dairy for whatever reason, right? We might have dairy allergy or lactose intolerance. And so in our example, we used dairy products to really give us that protein source. But we can also think of some of these other options. And we talked about oats, but tofu, Emily did use the silken tofu. We can also think about soy milk because unfortunately, some of our most popular plant-based milk alternatives, they don't really stack up when we're talking about protein content if we're comparing it to dairy milk. So something like soy milk does, so that could be an option. But if you're someone that's like, well, I really like almond milk or oat milk, you might want to think about adding one of these other items. I love nut butter in a smoothie, like berries with peanut butter. Yum, tastes like a PB&J. Throw some spinach in there.
Delicious.
What about almond butter?
Yeah, sure. I'm just a peanut butter.
We don't discriminate when it
I
comes to
don't
nut butters.
discriminate against nut butters, but
The
I
peanut
tend
butter
to
is
eat
more
peanut
affordable
butter
though.
more frequently in my house. Awesome. Okay, so on to our last recipe.
Last one, dessert, best for last. Who doesn't love chocolate? So I am not going to make a traditional chocolate mousse for you all today because I don't want to, because it's hard to make. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But we also have our avocado chocolate mousse. This is similar to another dessert that has been made in some Health Meets Food recipes. You may have seen the avocado chocolate pudding before. I like this because it's easier to make than the traditional chocolate mousse. If the chocolate mousse was easy to make, I would make it at the same time, but I don't want to. So we're gonna do our avocado chocolate mousse. We're gonna start with 2 avocados. They are nice and ripe. And so everything is gonna be made in the food processor today. I'm just going to kind of scoop out the flesh of these avocados. The way that I like to remove, like separate everything, remove the pit, is cut in until I reach that pit. And then I just kind of turn that avocado around my knife. And then you should just be able to twist and pull apart to separate those 2 halves. And I'm going to do that really quickly on the other one as well, and then get into how to take the pit out. So this is like very controversial, I guess. If you're scared of your knife, you don't have to do it this way, but I have what I think is a safer way to use your knife to take out the pit. So we are going to focus on the heel of our blade. That is closest to where we're holding. That is where we have the most control over our knife. My other hand is going to be nowhere near the avocado. So what we're going to do is just a little kind of flicking motion with our wrist to embed the knife into that pit. And if you're really ripe, it just falls right out. If you need to, you can twist and pull, but I got really lucky today. Now I have a pit on my knife. What do I do now? How do I get this off without hurting myself? We're gonna pinch on either side of the blade and just push down. That's it. I'm not pulling, I'm not really getting the blade anywhere close to my hand. I'm pushing away from the blade of that knife. So again, my hand is over here, flick, embed, twist, and push that pit off of your knife. Again, might be controversial, but I don't like using a spoon to kind of remove that flesh because I find that a lot of it ends up on the pit. And avocados are expensive. They're really expensive nowadays. So if we're spending, $2 on an avocado, ideally we're not, but if we are, we don't want to waste any of it. And so now I'm just going to use a spoon to scoop all of that out and add that to my food processor. Again, you don't have to use a food processor for this. You could use a blender. I find that the processor just gives me a bit of a smoother mousse, but if you don't have one, use a blender. It's totally okay. All right, so we have the hardest part done. That's it. That's the only thing I have to cut. And now for our other ingredients, we're going to add a little bit of milk. You can use non-dairy milk here. I think this is regular, but I've done it with almond, oat, soy, whatever milk you like. A little bit of milk. We are going to sweeten it with a little bit, I think about 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. We're going to add a dash of vanilla, some cocoa powder, not hot chocolate mix. I've had people that have been in my cooking classes, they call me at the grocery store and they're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be buying. So I kind of walk them through, show them what the label is supposed to look like, make sure they buy the right thing, just regular old cocoa powder. And then we're going to add a dash of instant coffee. Instant coffee and anything with chocolate is really going to bring out that chocolatey flavor. It's going to instantly make it seem like richer and just like, it just tastes like chocolate. You're not really going to taste the coffee. If you want to taste the coffee, you could add a little bit more, go for kind of a mocha effect, but you really just need about a half a teaspoon of that instant espresso powder to really make that chocolate flavor come through. And then all we have to do is blend. I'm missing the top on here. One really important thing when you are blending anything like this is to stop after the first few seconds and use a rubber spatula to scrape down the sides to make sure that everything is being evenly incorporated. And you also want to make sure your avocados are nice and ripe so you don't get big old chunks of avocado in your mousse. If you like avocados, probably not going to be a big deal, but if you're serving this to someone else, you want to present this nice decadent dessert, you want that to be fully blended. And I think you had a couple questions for me about the mousse while that blends.
Yeah. So one thing, are you adding melted chocolate to this as well?
I am. I forgot about it. All right. So some of you may thanks, Heather.
I'm like, wait a minute, I think we're missing something.
Some of you may have noticed that I put a bowl on top of my pot of soup earlier that actually contains some chocolate chips in it. I selected this recipe, which calls for a microwave, and then I remembered that they probably wouldn't let me have a microwave on stage. So you can always do a double boiler to melt your chocolate chips. Just put them in a bowl that fits over a pot. Make sure that you have some liquid in your pot that doesn't actually touch the bottom of the bowl. You just want to simmer that for a little bit until your chocolate chips are melted. They don't look melted right now, but if I put my spatula in, they are in fact totally melted because they've just been hanging out over that hot, still steaming soup. Thanks, Heather.
I will say I prefer melting chocolate this way, even though it might seem kind of more labor intensive or harder than the microwave, but I feel like the microwave, you can really burn chocolate chips.
Yeah,
it is gross.
No, the double boiler is worth the extra step to do. It works better. It's indirect heat, so it's not going to scorch. One thing though, depending on the type of chocolate morsel you're using, make sure the bowl of the double boiler is completely dry. The surface that the chocolate's going to touch, because if there's water in there with the chocolate, it can cause the chocolate to do something funny called seize, which becomes like a solid block. And yeah, so
gross. Okay, I do have a question for you. So I know that you use maple syrup in this recipe.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maple syrup, you know, if we're talking, we're not talking Aunt Jemima, we're talking like pure maple syrup here. It's expensive.
Yes.
Can we use a different sweetener? Why did you use maple syrup? You know?
Yeah, you can definitely use a different sweetener here. I use the maple syrup because in this application, we're not really heating anything up. And so I want my sugar to be in a liquid state because we don't want grainy pieces of unmelted sugar in our mousse. It's just going to give you a weird texture. People might be kind of off put by that. So the maple syrup just blends in really nicely. You could use honey, agave nectar, anything kind of liquid. You could even use a little simple syrup, just sugar melted in a little water if you want to. I do enjoy the flavor that the maple syrup gives, but it's such a small amount. Whatever sweetener you have available to you is totally fine to use.
Another thing would be that depending on what chocolate chips you're using in this, the maple syrup would let you make this completely a vegan option for an avocado mousse, right?
Yeah, so if you wanted to use some dairy-free chocolate chips or a really dark chocolate chip, you could totally make this dairy-free and vegan. Because you can also use a non-dairy milk in this as well. And my mousse is done. I'm just going to plate it up really quickly. So you can see that really didn't take me much time at all. It just threw everything in the blender, food processor. And again, lazy. I'm lazy. I want to find the easy way out of stuff. When this first comes out of the food processor, it is going to have more of a pudding-like texture. You can eat this right away, but I do recommend putting it in the fridge. Like if you want to make this to serve to someone, have a nice party, impress them, be like, yeah, I made chocolate mousse, I'm fancy. Put it in the fridge for a few hours first. The texture is going to change and become a little more mousse-like as it sets. And I will say, if you do this in the blender, you are going to incorporate a little more air into your mousse as well. And that's going to give you that airy, moussey texture that a lot of us are looking for in a chocolate mousse.
Cool. Okay. So I think if we go back to our slide view, we can talk a little bit about the nutrition on this recipe.
Yeah, and some of the differences in the method of preparation between what I just did and a traditional chocolate mousse. So in this we'll look at the ingredients of a traditional chocolate mousse. So we have, some chocolate chips, have that in both of them. We have 3 tablespoons of butter, 3 large eggs that you have to separate the whites and the yolks from. We're going to have a bit more sugar, 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons versus just our 2 tablespoons of maple syrup and the one we made. And we're also going to have a 1/2 cup of heavy cream in there. And so in a traditional chocolate mousse, you have to separate your egg whites from your egg yolks. You have to whisk your egg whites into a stiff peak. You have to whisk your egg yolks over a double boiler. You got to add the sugar and the chocolate to it. Make sure you don't curdle your eggs. And then combine everything together. You're using a lot of bowls, a lot of whisks. You got to pull out your KitchenAid if you have one or some kind of mixer. It just requires a much more advanced skill set to pull this off successfully versus what I just did. I threw everything in the blender. So there is a big difference in that method of preparation. We made this, we have healthier fats. We have some fiber in this, less sugar. And that's all great. And I love that about this recipe. But the thing I love about it most is that it's easy. It is easy for me to make. And so if we look at our differences in nutrition facts, this is the final one. Again, that traditional chocolate mousse is going to be much higher in calories, higher in saturated fat specifically coming from that heavy cream and the egg yolks that are going to be in there. Not that egg yolks are bad. We love eggs, but they are adding some saturated fat to that other mousse. We're also going to have a lot more sugar in that traditional chocolate mousse. I find that this one is plenty sweet just from that maple syrup and the but the sweetness from the chocolate chips. And it's a little bit hidden, but the avocado one does have 2 more grams of fiber per serving. If we can get fiber in a dessert, amazing. And we don't even, realize that fiber is in there. And I also wanted to point out that our avocado chocolate mousse is going to be much higher in potassium than that traditional mousse. So again, if I can get potassium in a dessert, great. I'm happy with that.
Definitely. I also want to say that mousse to me is very rich. And I find that when I eat that, I don't need to eat a big serving of it to feel satiated. I really like to pair it with something like fresh berries to sort of cut the richness a little bit. And then you're getting more fiber because you're eating more fruit. I think one of the things that you just mentioned, which I just want to kind of talk about as we start to wrap up here, is that one of the barriers that sometimes our patients or people will cite as a challenge when trying to eat healthier is that it is more time consuming or it is more difficult. And this avocado mousse example is a great example of why that doesn't always have to be true. I'm not saying it's not sometimes true, but this is a great example where we made nutrient dense food a more convenient choice. So as Emily mentioned, easy to find ingredients. And yes, avocados may be a little pricey, but the dairy, particularly that heavy cream in a regular mousse, that's an expensive dairy product.
I have a question about the avocado. I think this is an amazing variation on something that's obviously not very healthful traditionally. What if you had an allergy to avocado? Is there another plant-based ingredient you could use for a similar result?
I think we've used banana before.
I've also seen a similar concept with like silken tofu as the base of a sort of, pudding situation. I've seen it with like a chocolate flavoring because the tofu, you know, when you use a lot of the silken tofu, you need something with a bold, pungent flavor to sort of cover up the tofu-ness of it, I think, if you're trying to pass it off as dessert. But so chocolate is a good one, because it has enough of that flavor. So that could be an option. The silken tofu way? Yeah, I've made a version like that. Yes, definitely. So it's important to note too, you know, not every healthy swap. I feel like a lot of times, you know, in our profession, we talk a lot about making healthy swaps. This isn't always going to be something that our patients are willing or able to do, but hopefully we've shown you some things here today that really highlight it actually can be, you know, an easier choice or more cost-effective choice or a time-saving choice by some of the produce items that we use today. All right.
Yeah, so just to wrap things up, reiterating what Heather said, we want to be realistic when we're making substitutions or when we're recommending substitutions. And we also want to make sure that we keep our flavors in check. So again, like if we're swapping out tofu for the avocado, making sure that the flavor is still going to be good. I think sometimes, you know, we're making these recipes and in the name and in the spirit of health, we forget about, you know, adding great seasonings to the things, making sure that they actually taste good and we want to eat them. So we want to keep our flavors in check. When in doubt, bulk up with vegetables. They can be fresh, frozen, canned, pre-chopped, whatever way works for you. We can bulk up with those vegetables to make more servings, to make our meals more nutrient dense. And remembering that sometimes that higher energy density is the goal, but we can still have nutrient density with energy density at the same time. They don't need to be seen as opposites. And thinking of convenience foods in practice too, we want to remember there's a saying that I hate where people say, oh, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. So what's your excuse for not doing X, Y, and Z thing? We don't all have the same 24 hours in a day. So for our patients, our clients that are busy, that have 2 jobs, that have kids, that are, you know, really juggling a lot, taking an hour or 2 out of their day to cook an entire meal sometimes isn't an option for them. So finding ways to incorporate those more convenient foods to make sure that they're still getting nutrition without that stress of having to, you know, cook a whole meal from scratch is going to help them get more nutrient density into their diet. And just remembering that our time is valuable, our time is money. And with planning, we can even make our own convenience foods. We've talked about making your own frozen fruit foods. You can pre-chop foods, make things easier for yourself. So future you will thank you. And our goal is always to try to make that healthier, that more nutritious choice, the easier choice. So we're more likely to make it.